We're live with Theological Perspectives, and today we'll be talking about Genesis chapter 13 in the verse of the day. So to kick right off in verse 1, Abraham went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. Now Abraham was very rich in livestock, silver, gold, possessions, and he went in his journey from the south as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first, and there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. So the first is indiscretionary verse. Lot also went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they may dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. Another indiscretionary verse, and I'll explain why in a moment. So Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Think about this. Abraham being the elder, by right, he should have had the choice of the land, the choice of the land. But he humbled himself and he gave it to Lot to not cause further strife between the herdsmen, the people. Didn't him and Lot. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will take the left. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jericho, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. So which obviously, think about that. You know, in quotations, you have before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, another discretionary verse. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. And here's another indiscretionary verse. Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent as far as Sodom. Now, keep that in mind, that Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, the promised land. So, this is what I had put on the verse of the day. It's not merely the land where the Israelites would live, but the sworn inheritance of God's people. The whole land of Canaan, where they resided as a foreigner, that God would give as an everlasting possession to Abraham's descendants after him, and he would be their God. Genesis chapter 17, verse 8, Exodus chapter 6, verse 4, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 38, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 49, 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 18, Psalms chapter 105, 11. Now, Noah's grandson was Canaan, the son of Ham, from whom the Canaanites originally came from. Genesis chapter 9, verse 18. The Canaanite race was cursed. God pronounced judgments on Canaan's descendants, the Canaanites, which apparently were still in the land. Obviously, in Genesis chapter 13, verse 7, which we had read earlier, and I had said that I was going to talk about the indiscretionary verse. When the Israelites, led by Moses, arrived at Canaan, they found the inhabitants of the land to be mighty people, giants, fortified cities. The Canaanites worshipped numerous foreign deities. Their religion and culture were known to be extremely immoral and wicked. Genesis chapter 10, verse 19, Exodus chapter 13, verse 5, Leviticus chapter 18, verse 27. Judges chapter 1. Given the context clues, Abraham and his descendants would have had trials and tribulations, many battles to face. However, Lot himself would have a lot of battles. Lot ended up getting taken captive in chapter 14. Abraham had to go rescue. The things that he owned were stripped from him. He was further humbled. If we look, and kind of Lot ended up in a little bit of a sad, ending towards, later on in the story. Because in chapter 19, the angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom, and Lot saw them, and he rose to meet them. He bowed his face to the ground, and he said, "How are you, my lords? Please turn into your servant's house. Spend the night, wash your feet, then you will rise early and go on your way." They said, "No, we'll spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly, so they turned in and entered his house. Then he made them a feast, baked them unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city came, of Sodom, both old and young, and all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. They called out to Lot, "Where are those men who came to you tonight? Bring them out, that we may know them carnally." So Lot went out of the doorway. So Lot tried to save these folks. I'm pretty sure he didn't know they were angels. Obviously, we know the manifestation of God, or the angels that come down, look like men, women, whatever the case, however you want to see it. And so here these two angels came down. Lot tried to keep them from getting hurt, from spending the night. But here he was trying to save them, even willing to give up his own daughters to the townspeople, and He ended up barely getting saved. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. The whole thing with Lot and his kids or whatever. And they thought they were the last ones left. And just Lot, went downhill. But Abraham, after Abraham had made that break with Lot, the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now, look from the place you are, northward, southward, eastward, westward, for all the land that you see I will give you and your descendants forever, and I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants could also be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and width, for I give it to you. Then Abraham moved his tent and went and dwelt by the Tabernath trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Think about that for a second. Lot and how he turned out versus Abraham and how he turned out. And granted, Abraham had many battles from there, and so did his descendants all the way down. The perspective and the moral of the story in today's verse of the day, we illuminated the idea that, being humble, to pray about all things, that, not to go by tradition and what people consider, in society correct. That you're older, you should go first, this, that, and the other. Abraham, being older, he humbled himself and he let Lot choose the land to not cause strife. So we should also humble ourselves to where we don't cause strife, even though it seems like we're losing out in a situation or we're losing respect or whatever the case. And that's hard in certain predicaments. But I want you to keep that in mind, that the servitude attitude, we have to humble ourselves and turn away from these things. And we're called to be peacemakers. We're called to submit and surrender to the Lord God. And sometimes that involves letting other people go, even though traditionally, or in culture, it implies the opposite, that we should be the ones reverenced and honored for our age or the knowledge we carry. But on the contrary, we're called to humble ourselves and to live in that spirit of humility on a day-to-day basis. And to remember that, to trust in God, regardless of what we're going through, whatever quarrels and battles, whatever things we have going on in our life, to try to be the peacekeepers and bring peace between everyone, and also make peace with others. And even though we want what we want, and we want this and we want that, sometimes we have to let others get what they want, because in the end, God may have more blessings for you. Store it up in humbling yourself than if you were to just, like Lot, choose the land and go that way. So just keep that in mind, as you proceed through today and through your week. Carry that humility and humble yourselves and turn away. It's real easy to say something. It's real easy to act out, to act up, to get angry. It's a lot harder to turn away from anger. It's a lot harder to keep your silence, to forgive, to let go. So we challenge you to practice humility from your household with your kids, which I know your kids require a lot of humility in your life. You may want to do this, that, and the other, or you may want to, one day you might get angry, and you have to remember that they're kids. You gotta humble yourself, because you're taking your possessions or whatever, they might have damaged your car, and you're caring about it too much, and it's no longer about that you have a motor vehicle, so you wanted to keep it in prime condition. Now you're angry that the kids, damaged your baby, and just humble yourself. Remember that kids will be kids in the car. You'll always have the car, and just work on being humble this week. That's all. That's the message for today. Thank you for listening. This has been Theological Perspective.